As we begin our course, it's important to realize that reading is a very complex cognitive process. And for some of our struggling readers, it becomes even more difficult. And so when we're talking about struggling readers, we really look at things from the perspective of that systematic explicit reading instruction. And a lot of school districts are moving into that type of reading instruction for all of their students. So this is going to be really important for you to understand, the process of reading. In this particular PowerPoint, we're going to talk about who our at-risk students are for reading difficulties. We're going to understand the interconnected systems involved in the reading process, and we're going to be able to identify who our struggling readers are. I want to start with this little video because I think it's really a good way for us to begin to think about the process of reading. So let's just kind of watch this for a moment.
You can draw sounds. Draw sounds. Yes. I can draw sounds. And I can speak them back.
To learn to read with this new magical technology, to be able to arrange the letters in the right order, to actually conjure, as it were, that thing that you just spelled. It was experienced by oral peoples who had not met the written word before. When they first encounter it, they experience it as magic, as a very powerful form of magic.
Blackpool, what you do?
Making words.
Words? You not speak.
I will show you. Tell me something.
So what?
Something I do not know.
My woman's mother died in snow last winter.
Your mama cheated.
Wabima, Machi, Ashton.
Hey, Ashton! Tu vas bien, bloc.
Last winter, Shamina's wife's mother died in the snow.
Matausio.
To focus one's eyes on these little bits of ink on a page and see vision. And hear conversations that are unfolding on the other side of the planet. See scenarios that happen not just elsewhere, but 2,000 years ago. All through my participation with these little, ostensibly inert bits of ink on a page seems to me, a kind of magic, a kind of participation, animistic participation. And it's not by chance that the word spell has this double meaning. To cast a spell, or to arrange the letters in the correct order, to spell out a word. Because these two meanings were at one time very, very close. unless we recognize how potent, how powerful this technology is, and how profoundly and even in many non-rational ways it influences our experience. Unless we recognize the magic of the written word, then we are simply under its spell.
So thinking about that and how complex reading actually is, I think that video is a really nice way to begin to think about how magical reading is to children. So who are these students who are at risk for us? Well, 5% of your students are able to read. 20 to 30% learn with ease. So you might get students coming in already knowing how to read. 20 to 30% will learn to read with ease. About 30% will learn with extra support or intensive support. So these are where you start thinking about those kids in tier 2 and tier 3. And then another 5% have pervasive reading disabilities. So these in the middle, the learn with support and learn with intensive support, could be students who are just at risk. But the students with actual reading disabilities is about 5%. So one of the things that we need to think about is learning the lingo of our language system. And this is a really important piece because so much of it comes together and is intertwined with reading. So we think about semantics, and semantics is really the study of words and vocabulary. It's how children build meaning or gain meaning. So semantics is meaning building, right? Syntax is rules for word order in sentences or our organizational rules. So the noun comes before the verb in a sentence, or, how does a prepositional phrase, how is that structured? So the structure of what we do with our sentences. Discourse is longer sections of written or oral language. So if we're doing a discourse, means that we're having a longer conversation, a longer monologue. So it's those longer narrative or oral pieces. And pragmatics are the rules for language in social context. So how do we use our language in a social context? And that governs some of our word choices that we do. So thinking about those, when we think of words and vocabulary, we build or form them after something has been damaged or destroyed. So we take them apart. We start looking at affixes and prefixes and suffixes, and we do that. When we think about syntax, we think about the builder and how he has to put things back together in order. So he has to be able to understand how things go together, how one thing builds on the other. And we think about things like paragraph structure, genre conventions. So we're reconstructing things. We're really kind of taking all this information and finding a way to, build or help students see the very structure. And language is that. Language, our ability to have a good communication or language system, is completely integrated into our ability to read and read well and comprehend well. So then we think about semantics, and that's the study of words and vocabulary and meaning. Syntax, again, is how we put things together. So let's look here at this. I love to show this rope and show you how integrated the reading is. And this is from Scarborough. So Scarborough has developed a graphic for us to try to understand how these things are so intertwined. And he developed this graphic called the reading rope. And he looks at it from this way. For language comprehension, you have to have background knowledge, vocabulary knowledge, language structure knowledge, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. And so that's our building blocks, right? And we have to have word recognition and be able to do phonological awareness, decoding and spelling, and sight recognition. Look how many more threads are here in this language comprehension. And here, from the word recognition, is important, but not as much as having a good basic language foundation. And as things become increasingly strategic in terms of understanding and knowing these things, and as this becomes more automatic, we can decode easily, we have good sight recognition. As that begins to develop and this begins to develop, it begins to become much more intertwined. And that's what gives us our skilled reader, our fluent execution, our coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. So it's multifaceted, and it is acquired over years of instruction and practice. So when we think about that, though, we also have to think about what's going on in the child's brain and the processing that's happening up inside that cognitive process. So we look at some processors that are at work within our brain. So the orthographic processor sees visual images. So that's the visual images. This is seeing the word with the letters clustered in a spelling pattern. So being able to see what constitutes a word. That's the orthographic processor. The phonological processor is more auditory, right? And they can identify and order the sound of the words. So we think of our phonemic awareness, our phonics. The meaning processor is now, as we're starting to try to understand, to recognize words quickly, and understand the meaning of those words very quickly. And that means vocabulary. So the more developed the child's vocabulary is, they can understand things better. And then that's all happening with the meaning processor. The context processor really is having that prior knowledge. Being able to look at the context clues or look at the environmental things around them or around words, or bringing in prior knowledge that they have to help them process that information. So while this is all going on as far as, the language and the fluency, we then see that all of this is going into our little brain, and we are engaging each of these processing pieces of our brain to become a fluent reader. So our struggling readers can have problems in one or more of those processes. So either orthographic or, the phonological processor, the meaning processor, all of those processes, they could have one or more areas of difficulty within those processes. So effective intervention needs to be specific to the area of difficulty. So we have to understand, where are they struggling? What specifically are they struggling with? So we know that serious reading problems could be brain-based, right? We now have these wonderful MRIs that show us so much more detail in our brain and how our brain functions. So those brain imaging shows areas of underactivation in a region in the back of the brain that enables first accurate then automatic reading. So if we see that on a brain imaging, then we know that there is a problem there within the brain that is interfering with the child's ability to, read accurately and read automatically. So effective language instruction, including systematic instruction in phonemic awareness and phonics, is going to work to generate that and repair that for our struggling readers. So it's got to be very effective and systematic. So remediation and special education are two common ways of addressing reading difficulties, but they have a really dismal record of success. And why is that? Because a lot of times these kids go along and miss all that basic building blocks. And then they have little to build upon. So, what we want to do with our students is prevent rather than remediate. So, catching them early, giving them good interventions, good systematic interventions, good tier interventions if that's what they need, very early on, so that we're preventing further reading struggles instead of having to go back and try to fix what they've missed and how far behind they've become. So fewer than one child in 8 who is failing to read by the end of first grade ever catches up to grade level. So as educators, we need to understand how important those early skills are and that early effective systematic reading is. Approximately 75% of our students who read below grade level in 3rd grade will be poor readers at the end of high school. So it's really important that we catch these things early. And one of the ways that we do that is through this multi-tiered system of support. And when we talk about a multi-tiered system of support, I know we've all heard of response to intervention or RTI or RTII, but multi-tiered system of support is a little bit more comprehensive. The RTI framework is used as part of the MTSS approach, but MTSS goes beyond just academics. So it covers social and emotional supports as well, behavior intervention plans. So looking at all of those pieces. So if you look at a multi-tiered system of support and you look at maybe a very young child in kindergarten who is gifted and they're bored with the curriculum, you may see behaviors because they're so bored. So, and their social skills are maybe really poor, yet they're so advanced. It's important to recognize all aspects of why is that child misbehaving? Are they bored? Is there a chance that they're gifted? Where are their skills? And even kids who are struggling, some of those behavioral issues are actually very tied to the academic. So MTSS looks at the whole child. And here's sort of a nice umbrella picture of what we mean by MTSS. So under the MTSS umbrella, we do see those tier supports for academics. Tier 1 is the core reading, Tier 2 is targeted, Tier 3 is more intensive. We also look at social communication with school and community, and we're collaborating. We're having parents involved. We've got the school involved, the community involved. There's a lot of communication going on between those stakeholders. We also look at teamwork and professional development. So teamwork is how are we in our schools working together to make this process, this tiered system of support work well. And that can be configured very differently depending on what school you're in. Also, our curriculum design is a part of MTSS. So what are we doing with our curriculum? What are we doing with our curriculum in core? What are we doing with our curriculum in Tier 2 and Tier 3? And then, of course, schools doing at least school-wide positive behavior intervention and support. So it's a much more robust view of RTII. So there are 3 key points about what RTI or MTSS can do. RTI neither creates nor fixes a learning disability. So putting them into these different tiers or responding to interventions does not necessarily create a learning disability, and a lot of times it doesn't actually fix a disability. So RTII is a dynamic model that allow students to move between levels of intervention. So they're not just stuck in a particular intervention. So take a child who is struggling with a certain aspect of reading, and the teacher says, you know what, they need tier 2 instruction in this particular level of, or this particular skill. So I'm going to move them up to level 2. And they do really well. Then they go back to level 1. So it's very dynamic. It's flexible and it's movable. The key to that 3-tier model is to provide effective instruction early and make sure that the students are provided with any of the resources they need and the support is there that's going to allow them to become more proficient readers. So let's take another look at a video.
Are math, writing, and reading. It's kind of cool, so you don't just with one teacher and you get to kind of move rooms and move teachers. When you go down into with Mr. Kirby and your small group, then it really stretches your brain in a really good way.
So teachers organize themselves in a variety of different ways, and it depends on teacher strengths and student needs. We may need a specific group just on predicting, and you don't have 5 kids who need predicting, and you're 22. You have a whole bunch of them across the learning community. So it's really important that the tiers are connected. Your core instruction could be inferring. If they're receiving tier 1 with me and tier 2 with you and tier 3 with someone else, we all are really teaching inferring. We just may be teaching it with different materials. That requires a lot of trust amongst teachers, and that also requires teachers to communicate. They meet every Wednesday in a learning community, and they definitely check in with each other about instruction.
They have almost all of their packet already filled out, and then there's some groups of kids that don't have anything filled out.
We have the same problems with when they come to us, they have to finish up the packet. So if we try to stick to what that core part is,
and then we meet as a student success team. That team is made up of myself, the learning community leader, all of the core teachers, administrators, guidance counselors, speech and language pathologists.
All of those stakeholders will sit around the table together, take a look at all the data, have deep conversations about the effectiveness of the core instruction, and also monitor the progress of the tier 2 groups and the tier 3, and then problem solve together to figure out the ways in which they might make adjustments. And then once they make those major adjustments, then they'll come back together once a month to make sure progress is being made.
Of the time. And then reading, which was mini lessons, 45% of the time, and then 83% of the time. And then you also had some really other good details.
Maybe her goal sheet is almost like twice as long, so she has more space like on Monday, and right before you go into tier 2, like what are the specific things you're going to do?
I think that we're meeting the students' needs better.
The growth that we see in our students is phenomenal. We've had kids go from 8th percentile to 30th, 40th percentile, and sometimes higher.
My work is to make sure that all kids get what they need. We have lots of different types of learners, and everybody deserves to have instruction that meets their needs.
That was beautiful.
So as we wrap up this first PowerPoint, let's think about, that coordinated system of support that we're doing for our students, and think about what that's going to look like as we start to delve into more systematic and explicit instruction.